Okay, I am Patty Armbruster. I live in eastern Montana, just down the road a piece. And I started a consulting business. It's a organic, natural growing. I consult for a lot of schools, for farm to school, but I also do other agricultural consulting. But I also am an agricultural teacher at the school in Hinsdale, Montana. So composting, we want to make it what's right for you guys, right? Because everybody is probably in a different place with composting. It's no different than your garden. Every single garden I go to is different. Every single person's got different resources, different locations, so everything kind of is going to be individualized. And so I hope that I can answer some of your questions and help you in your mission to grow food, right? So the compost is pretty helpful key to be successful with the food. So how many are you growers that are already currently growing? It's good, quite a few of you. And how many of you want to be growing local food or your own foods? Okay, good, excellent. Right, so I hope I can help you some. I've got a lot of experience, had a lot of training, and you'll see I've got resources on here to help you learn the different methods and things. So what is the compost? It's decomposed organic matter. And so it's a natural process of recycling organic matter such as leaves and so on, and food scraps into rich soil amendment, nicknamed black gold. Right, and I brought some for you. We're going to pass it around the room. I had to bring this in over this winter, so I harvested it last fall from my piles and brought it in. So it was, at times it got a little dehydrated, and I've rehydrated it, but I'll let it go around the room some. It is alive, right? We've got to have alive organic compost. Unfortunately, a lot of the stuff we buy, if we buy it in a bag, is not alive because of the federal rules and regulations. And so I've left this bag open, and you can see, if you look down in the bottom, you can see there's condensation down there. That is them breathing, so they need air, water, shelter, just like we do. This one I closed up, and so the bag will condense quite quickly from their activity, so you can send them around the room. Those are two different recipes. We'll get in a little bit about recipes. So our compost is actually our organic matter that's going to feed our microbes. And so it's good to kind of keep that in mind, that what we're really trying to do is feed the microbes so they do all the work for our plant. And so we just got to make them happy. The easiest way to make them happy is to follow nature's lead. So how many are you composting already? Wow, a lot of us. So how many are composting right now, today? And you know it. Yay! And we actually get our best composting under the snow and following nature's lead. And so when are we going to start composting? I'm going to start as soon as the weather breaks, but that's because I've stored all this product to be able to do that. When's Mother Nature going to start it again? When the next leaves fall off the trees, you know, and start the process over. So we got to think about what is nature doing and try to follow her lead, and we'll be way better off on a lot of this stuff. The armor on the soil, so we can grow the plant litter through cover crops and plant residue. How many have a clean garden where they've taken everything off the garden, everything's gone? Okay, so when you do that, you've robbed the food source for those microbes for that season, the winter coming up and on into the spring. So I know it's a cultural habit that we have of wanting to have clean gardens, and we get judged by our neighbors or whatever, but if you can stop that habit, it would be a better habit to have that decomposing natural process taking place and having the plant litter on top of the soil. And they call it armor on top of the soil. So it doesn't matter if you're big ag and you're growing a 1,000-acre cover crop field, when we cut it down, we leave it on the soil. Yes?
So like when your tomato plants are dead, you just leave them lay for the winter?
If they were not diseased, yes. But if I am being judged, I would cut it down and leave it on a soil surface and not 6 foot tall.
Just pull it out and let it.
But I don't care what my judgment, because I'm in eastern Montana and there's not too many neighbors and they already know that I'm crazy, so I let mine stay tall. But and I'm going to get into, hopefully, just a little bit. It's really tough in a 50-minute workshop or an hour workshop as to how to utilize your compost after you've made it to your best resources. Because when we make compost, we may have a pile this high and this big around, and I end up with a pile this tall. It seems like, well, that's not a lot of product. So I'll teach you how we can turn that product into a way more usable product and what we can do with it. Okay, so this is some of the soil life. And you know, when you first start talking about compost, people don't make the connection that all these guys are alive inside that compost. And so I've been trained by Elaine Ingham of the Soil Food Web and with the microscope and stuff. And the trainers are still learning. I mean, we're like in diapers, the trainers are. And so you'll see stuff under the microscope that you have no idea what they are. Well, neither does your educator know what they are either. We're just barely starting to touch on some knowledge of what's going on down there. And these are at 40x, so 400 times the power. This is a water piglet. That one's not at that power because it's a lot bigger organism, but that's probably at 10 power. But the fungi and the flagellates and stuff over in the other, and this is I think the pointer works. Hate to touch something and have it not, but the round thing, anything round that looks like a planet is something that's alive. It's just not mature yet. And so it's a cyst and hasn't already fully developed. Now there's times you can be under the microscope and you actually see those start forming and grow. And you're like, wow, that was like a couple seconds ago and now it's growing. You know, so some of them are really fast, others are creepy slow. Some might be in dormancy for years. You don't know. And so, but the key for us is to know that they're alive and they're in there and we want them. Here's a couple more. This is a nematode that's a bacterial feeding nematode, and that's a arthropod. They're shredders, and so anytime we're making a compost that has a lot of organic matter, a lot of wood chips, leaves and stuff, we'll have arthropods. They're going to come from the environment. I can't buy them or get them. They're just going to come. They're just part of what happens when you have a lot of wood chips and stuff on the ground. But you'll see lots of different soil life in this picture. Everything that's round is, and the oval that looks kind of oval and is a little flat on the end, that one is too. So, and then the little tiny stuff in the background is bacteria. All we need them all. So we want them all. So, but how difficult could it be to make compost? Is anybody having trouble making compost? So, anybody had trouble in the past? So there's a lot of things that can go wrong. One of the major things is moisture. So I'm in a very dry climate, and so last year our drought really caused havoc on making good compost. The year before I thought, wow, I've got this down, I know what I'm doing. Next year, like, man, I do not know what I'm doing. So it's going to be pretty organic, and so is your situation. I had a tree cut down close to my bins, and that changed a lot of stuff that I did not foresee. So you want to have some protection for it and not have blazing sun, which we get a lot of blazing sun in our area. And so you want to, but everybody's going to be different, right? I end up having to use a cover on mine. You may be saying, I need a fan, I need more air into this thing, because they need a lot of air too as we're making this compost. And I'll hopefully teach you a few simpler methods. So it's because there is very simple methods, but we got to be patient to make those work. So is there any questions at this stage of the game? Anybody come in here with a burning question that they would like to have answered before we?
So So I grow tomatoes in 5-gallon buckets, but like a lot of times I don't like get to like getting them put away or whatever. So right now I have old plants sitting in my 5-gallon buckets in my greenhouse. So can I use any of that then as compost for this coming season?
Yep.
Okay.
Yep, you just cut the plant off.
Cut it plant like you
Yep.
said earlier. Okay.
Yep. And if they're in the greenhouse, it'd probably been better to take at least the plant litter outside,
Okay.
because aphids love having leaf litter inside the greenhouse and harbor in it, and so they're a tricky bird with greenhouses.
Okay.
So yeah, you can use that. As long as it's not diseased. If it's diseased, then I'm like, well, I'm advocate to take it to the dump, right? But if it's not, then it needs to go back in the compost. Okay, time seems to be one of the limiting factors. When we start talking compost, and I'm going to pass you around these. If you don't have access to internet, you can keep these, but if you do, this is all going to be online. I'll pass this stuff around. There's some recipes on here. But anytime we start working with thermal compost, which we want to use thermal compost because that's what's going to kill the weed seeds and the diseases. So we've got to get it up to enough heat to do that. But when we do, then it's going to require some management. And so that's when people start having troubles with compost. They're like, I don't have time. Well, the compost temperature says, you better find time today because it's getting too hot. And so you're going to have to find out how we're going to turn it. If our goal is to not spend time on it, then we have to change how we're thinking and how we're going to compost and how long we want to be patient. Mother Nature's very patient, right? She lays down all of those leaves in the fall, and the next spring, you can't even tell there was leaves there. It's turned to humus and compost already. But that was 6 months. And so as humans, we want stuff right away, and compost, it's not that fast. If you are going to do a fast compost, you're going to be getting lots of exercise and you're going to be turning it a lot. Okay, so these are successful methods, all of which I've tried, and I'm going to get way deeper into the Back to Eden process, which is the deep mulching with wood chips right onto your soil surface. And then Mother Nature is going to do all that composting and amending that soil for you under the ground. Retain moisture. I think moisture is one of the Achilles heels to gardening that I keep trying to get people to think, well, 20 years from now, am I going to be able to turn the faucet on and not pay for it? I'm thinking, no, that's not going to be true. And maybe I won't even be able to turn on the faucet. So if I start mulching a foot deep of wood chips and compost is doing its own thing, I am retaining moisture, I don't have to water it, and I don't have weeds, both of which are high major labor issues, right? And it's a win-win. The plants are going to be even happier. So that's the Back to Eden process. The Elaine Ingham's process with the food soil web, she's doing a hot thermal compost over here in the corner, and that's the one that I've been using and I used to make these. Joe Salatin uses the animal method, and it's very successful if you got big enough animals to do it and an area to do it in. All of these people you can look up on the web, and that's just another example. The wood chip one and the donut style one. The Occidental Art and Ecology Center, for those people that are teachers, they have a phenomenal workshop in California. It's I think 5 days for the farm to school one, 10 days for the permaculture one. Just priceless. But they don't have hardly anything on the web for you to learn from, so you would need to know word of mouth that that's a place to go. So these are the different kinds. Composting, one is the one that you're going to be turning at least 5 times. Why 5 times? So there's 4 sides to your pile plus the top. All of them have got to get inverted to the inside to be the 160 degrees. Otherwise we didn't kill our weeds or our bacteria or our diseases. So it's got to get turned 5 times. So you got to know, I'm going into this, I'm going to be turning this pile 5 times. So and the next one is more, takes a year, it's very passive. We just layer the materials and walk away. I've got that going on in my yard too, so I got several different kinds going on. Okay, and then the commercial ones, they get into large windrows and big turning equipment and all kinds of stuff. Okay, so I like having something to control the pile. Even though I'm in a small community, I still don't want it to look like I'm out in the barnyard lot, you know. So I made a stackable bin. You can use wire, but this is an open-aired one that I had the students build at the school, and it's a donut method. So the donut method is like it sounds, it's open in the middle. That leaves kind of a chimney to let air go up through and keep air going around of it. We took the stack out after we built it, but we just had the stack in there to create it so that we was working with kids. This still required getting turned five times. This is a stackable method that I'm using currently both at the school and at my house. I make 3 stations of them. So there's 3 different pallets that the stacks can go on. So like if I'm in stack position 1 and I've just built it, and it's this high, and then I can unstack it as I'm turning it to go into station 2, right? In the very beginning, the very top is cold, so that gets turned into a bucket or wheelbarrow or something, so I know that's the top, and it has to get inverted to get into the inside, so it can get heated. So then I add it into the middle as I go down with the stack. The next time I stack, I turn over into the 3rd station, so then I can keep moving it along and not have to ever cause me a whole bunch of problems. We wanted to get to the 160. They say 120 to 160. How you're going to control that is what nitrogen sources go into the pile. Nitrogen causes heat and the reaction to take place. Your carbon will slow it down. But that also you got to keep in mind, if I want to grow a fungi pile that's high in fungus, which I want, because in eastern Montana we don't have any in our soil samples. You're like, where did they go? And we really need them. So I build that as a recipe in the compost when I make it. So it's high carbon and low nitrogen source when I do that to get what I want out of it. If you're wanting a high nitrogen compost, you're going to do the opposite in thinking, but you're going to have to be turning it a lot more often. So that's an example, and this was a little video. They don't have the internet working here, but as soon as I pull that cardboard off the top, it's just steam rolling out of it, because the air temperature was somewhere around 50 degrees, and that steam is coming out 160 degrees. Okay, so things you need easily available is water, is a major element. And if you could do this with rainwater, it'd be win-win, but I can't do that, so I'm having to use city water to do it. But you want to have access to have water. So you want to keep it moist enough when you grab a hold of it and you squeeze it, juice is going to come out between your fingers. That's the water amount that you want in it. Anything drier than that, it's not going to work. Anything wetter than that, it's going to turn to nasty stuff. So that's the goal. When you grab a hold of it and you squeeze it, there should be some juices running out. When we build it, we got to really make sure we get that stuff wet. So if I'm using cardboard and wood chips, then I may set it in a wheelbarrow or a barrel and soak it. Leaves, same thing, soak them ahead of time so that they're wet going into this, because any dry spots is going to cause it not to work right. So I like to use natural local resources as much as possible. I have the NRCS in the school shred paper for me, and so I gather it up whenever I go to town, and then I put it in a livestock trailer and store it until I'm ready to start building a pile. I have leaves that I get from community members. They'll bring them to me, and I think once you get words out, you know, that, hey, I want leaves. I got a friend in Great Falls. She says, hey, I want leaves, and her yard's the size of this room. Within 2 years, she has that yard full of bagged leaves. And then she takes them with a weed or a leaf blower machine and chops them up, so then it converts them about 2 bags to 1 bag. and then she's able to put it out in her garden and stuff. She just uses them as mulch, but I use them for mulch and composting, the leaves, rather than let them go off to the dump or get burnt. Coffee grounds is a major resource I use. I go to the local coffee shop that's very popular, and I come back with bags every week. And so probably within the year, I probably have 3 pickup loads of coffee grounds come from that one place.
What category does coffee fit in?
It's going to be your nitrogen. Yep, about 20 to 1 on your carbon to nitrogen ratio. So the carbon to nitrogen ratio is real important. Yes, sir.
Yeah, do tea grounds fall into that?
Tea, yes, yeah. I don't know about the carbon to nitrogen ratio on tea, but yeah, I'd use it the same. So I save all of my own and put it all in. You can use the coffee directly on soil too, you know, as a mulch or a weed block. Everybody worries about the change of pH, but I've got a video on here, a resource on here that shows you that that's not a big concern with the pine needles or the coffee. So, yes.
Those pine needles, how much is too much?
I've got that recipe coming around, and it'll be on the website and on this, right? So you want to pay attention to those are percentages of volume. So if I had a 3-gallon, I use about a 7-gallon planter as a measuring device, right? So if I fill that one time, then that's 1, and if I fill another one 7, then it's 7 to 1 on the percentage. Make sure that first week when you put it together, you don't go on vacation. You need to be there to babysit it for that first week, especially the first 3 or 4 days and until you get the heartbeat of that pile, because each heartbeat is going to be a little different. If I add in fish from the local fishermen into the pile, it's going to heat fast, and it's going to be great compost coming out. But I know I better be there to turn it quickly, right? Some of these commercial ones are turning 2 or 3 times a day, right? So you got too much nitrogen in your pile if you're having to be married to that pile every time you come home. You're like, oh my gosh. So you need to get more carbon into it, more leaves, more shredded paper, cardboard, anything you got to get that carbon to nitrogen ratio back in balance. We wanted about 30 to 1 carbon to nitrogen ratio. We had sprouted potatoes in the root cellar, and they went in there. That's at the school. So use whatever you got, right? Everybody's is going to be different. Like if I make a batch of compost and we evaluate it, it's going to be different than yours. And I try to put in as many different plant items as I possibly can get in there. So it's like a cover crop. The more varieties of cover crop you got in there, the more beneficial it's going to be to your soil and your soil microbes. It's going to be a win-win. Same way with composting. Because when we look at these things under the microscope, let's say we take a bucket and we just chop off a bunch of leaves or weeds. I use bindweed. We have a lot of bindweed problems in eastern Montana, so I put the bindweed in a bucket, filled it with water, and then after 72 hours, our soil life, like our flagellates and our ciliates and stuff, will start, protozoas will start coming to life. So then I start looking at it under the microscope. And so as I started doing this, every time I did a bucket of bindweed, it didn't matter if it come from your farm or my farm or the neighbors or the community garden, they all looked exactly the same. And I'm like, wow, it's like a fingerprint. And what's in that is the soil life. So if we got more varieties of plants going into that compost or into the cover crop and then breaking down into the soil, the more soil life we got in there. And you can't have too many. And we want the local ones, right? If we can get them right here from our own tree waste in our own community, we have our local microbes. And that's going to be the best thing for your own environment. It's going to be best for your own health and for the plants that you're growing. Edible Schoolyard in Berkeley is another phenomenal education, especially for teachers. They use a pile method. They call it Compost Row or something. So they're actually moving these piles as they turn them. And they screen theirs. I do not screen mine. I just figure if I got rougher stuff that it's going to take more time to break down and have more carbon, more fungal food. So if you want fungi, you want bigger chunks of wood type product in it to get the fungi, because that's what they eat and that's what they need. So that's some finished compost. This was sifted here on this side, and just use a sifter over the top of a wheelbarrow. It's not required. I mean, Mother Nature doesn't do that step. And so unless we're out there trying to sell it or needing to win the beauty prize, you don't need to. So whatever's best for you, right? I decided I was going to use brewer's mash one year. Great resource. Every time I turned around, the guy was texting me. It says, I've got 5 more barrels, 20-gallon barrels of brewer's waste. A little bit goes a long way with brewer's waste. It's high nitrogen, and the internet does not say it's very high nitrogen, but I can guarantee you when you put it in that pile, it is going to be high nitrogen. So a little bit will go a long ways for some of these resources. So this is probably the best hint that I can give you and help, that once you fully understand, I have compost, but now if I brew it into a tea, my compost in that little bag wouldn't go very far if this was our garden, would it? If I put that compost into a brewer bag and then put it in that bucket of water and aerated it for 24 hours, I could do this room and that room with that tea, with that, or more. I mean, unbelievable amount. So Elaine Ingham says it's 1,000 to 1. So if I have 1% compost and now I aerate it, I had 1% of the soil food web. Now after the aeration process, I have 1,000%. Yes?
So what, how would you do that? Like how much compost would you use and how much water would you?
And this is about a quart baggie of compost into this brewer. It's a paint straining looking bag, but they sell them as compost tea bags on the internet. And so you can get them from anybody, from Planet Natural or any other organic type supplier would have them, or Amazon or anybody.
And then how long would it sit?
It depends on what your goal is, of what you want out of the compost, right? So the fungi, if we want fungi, then it's going to be in there longer than if we wanted a high nitrogen, more bacterial tea. So in 24 hours, the bacteria is going bananas and happy as could be, right? But then we're going to get soil food web life. We're going to get the protozoas start coming into the picture. They're going to eat the bacteria. So that takes longer to get those, 72 hours to get them to be fully engaged. But they're in there, they'll develop as you put them out, though, yes.
And then you're just pouring this onto your garden?
Spray it, or watering can, or any way you can get it out. Mm-hmm.
What kind of aerator?
It's a compost tea aerating pump and tube, and so this is an air tube here that goes down, and it's got a little spiral that sets on the bottom of the bucket, and then that little air hose is hooked to that little tiny pump there. It's much bigger than an aquarium pump, though. Your aquarium pump isn't really getting as much oxygen into that water as you want it to be. And I have a lot of gardeners say, oh, I can make compost tea, and I'm like, oh, you do? I says, you want to explain it to me or show me? And so usually it's leachate off of their compost. Okay, and that's just leaching through your compost. That's just leachate. Okay, that's not compost tea. It's just liquid that's come out of your compost.
What's the water temperature?
Still
How much
good, but
factors water? It looks like it's only a little bit, so it'll warm up.
so the water's sensitive to your air environment. So is the microbes. So if I brew my tea at 70 degrees, I better hope that I'm putting it out at 70 degrees on my garden, because I've just created microbes that like 70 degrees. If I brewed it at 40 degrees in a shed or something at my house, and then I want to go put it out on somebody's garden at 80 degrees, I probably didn't do a very good job. So you kind of want to match that. There's light sensitive, so you'd want to put it out when it's not bright out. So earlier in the day in the evening or a cloudy day. You don't want to brew in the sunlight. I brew inside under a cover or cover the bucket to brew. Yes?
And you just put it out at night?
Yep.
Okay.
Yep, and not expensive method of putting it out. You can just be a watering can. It can go on the plant surface, on the mulch, on the ground. And the biggest hint of all is it can go on your next compost pile. Because I just took the best of what I made on the last compost and inoculated the new compost with it. The neighbor you could get it from, you know, or if you know a neighbor that's making great compost, buy a gallon from them. Don't go put it out on your lawn or your garden, or you're going to brew it. And then you've created thousands of those microbes, and now you can use them to put on your passive compost piles or your active compost pile. You've just populated your piles with those microbes. Yes?
Locally, Box of Rain over on Meridian has compost kits or components or what, and a ton of information, so just an FYI.
Okay.
That's interesting.
Yep, and I got some local resources here that's going to help you. That's probably your best resource of all, is because not everybody's going to be able to do this, right? A lot of people say, well, I don't have any spot even for that stackable bin, right? There's all kinds of littler ways that you can do it, but that get into a 2-day workshop instead of a 1-hour presentation. So we're going to stick with what we are kind of working on here. So those are the recipes that went around. So your small scale, and I want fungal, is your top one, so only 10% nitrogen, about 30% greens, and your food waste is going to be in that 30% green probably. Your alfalfas and fish and whatever would be in your high nitrogen in the 10%. So you'd want to gather that stuff up ahead of time, right? Because it's a recipe and it's like you're going to put it all together at one time, and we're going to layer it. In the bottom of the pile, I don't know if I've got that. Oh, that's just this is a household one. This is going to be available to you. That's 50% green and 50% woody, but you're making a big heaping pile of it. I know guys that on ranches got heaping piles of old cow manure, and they can decompose a whole dead cow inside those piles. That nature's going to do its thing. Yes?
My grandma used to always take scraps after dinner and throw them in the compost pile. Is that...
Okay, so you're taking scraps from your house and adding them to the pile. So each time you add new, you really start over, if that makes sense. So I like to have a pile where, okay, this year I'm putting them on this wood chip deep mulch pile. I put them there. That's where it's going to be an active pile. And then every time it stops snowing or they get exposed, I throw some leaves or wood chips on top of them. That's a method, right? I'm not going to go back in there and turn it or anything. And I probably, unless I'm worried about some disease or something, I probably wouldn't even go recompost it. But if I'm worried about disease or something, I would gather that up with wheelbarrow, take it and recompost it in the stacked or hot method. You can heat greenhouses with the compost active methods. So that's what we're going to do next, is build a hot pile inside a small high tunnel to heat it for the spring. Yes?
Are there any wood chips that you wouldn't want to put in that's toxic, or any certain things to keep out of it?
Yeah, as long as your trees have not been sprayed with anything. So preferably the best woods is your white woods. So cottonwood, ash, your poplars, willows, your alders are great white woods. It's not to say we can't use the conifers, but those are the preferred. One thing I do add to every mix is nitrogen fixing tree browse. So we have Russian olives that other people don't like, and I think that they're awesome. But so I go down the road and I clip them, and I will add those to my piles along with willows. So we have willows growing in certain roads that just grow right up through the road. So I go clip all the greens right off the willows right before I'm going to make a batch. And those willows have got rooting hormones in them like you would not believe. And so I'm like, well, it cannot hurt my compost. As long as I'm not putting a bucket of water of willows and sprouting them, you know, I'm going to heat them. Okay, any questions on, yeah?
Is there a difference between wood chips and sawdust?
Yes, sawdust is pretty fine, and it tends to pack, right? We want,
No reason you can't use it if
you can use it, you just want to mix it in. And I have before, but you got to mix it. You got to think this pile needs to stay with air in it. So when we first build the pile, we put wood branches, sticks on the bottom, kind of like building a campfire, so that you got some air for that to run through. So that's on the bottom. And stuff that after we turn a pile, there's still black sticks that didn't decompose. Those now become the bottom of the next pile. I just inoculated that next pile with my microbes. And it may take 2 or 3 turns, maybe in 4 different times before those break down, right? If it was a hardwood and it's a stick not big enough to break, it's going to take some time to break it down, but it's still adding to every pile. It's adding great stuff to every pile. There's an easy passive way. We just layer this stuff, get it wet when you do layer it. Be cautious not to put too much nitrogen in it when you do this way, or it will turn into active instead of a passive pile very quickly. Right, so passively, that means we're just going to let Mother Nature do this, and it's going to take 6 months to a year, but we just offer the layerings of the material to it and walk away and leave it. So depending on your locations, how big of place you got, and what you're doing. It's a great way to go. Your microbes probably are not going to be as diverse and as great as something like when we're in the room to make compost tea on, or if we was to look under the microscope, it's not going to be as good as real hot thermal compost that I know I added 40 different plant materials to. That one's going to be the better, but it's still something we can do, right? A lot of us have a lot of jobs and things that we got to do, and so that's one way. And I'm doing this all the time. I've always got one going. Just leave it alone. But the easiest of all, this is the one everybody came for, right? Is the easiest of all. And this one is just unbelievable, all right? So it's the back to Eden process of gardening. I don't know if anybody has studied that, but it's just unbelievable, where you just literally put the wood chips on your garden. I have never tilled gardens, never have tilled them, right? Put down a weed barrier of cardboard or 6 layers of paper, the wood chips on top, and where you want to plant, you dig away and you plant, but the wood chip layer stays in there. It could be anywhere from 6 to 12 inches. If you're dealing with something like bindweed, it'd have to be a big sheet of cardboard and have them overlapping, right? I don't know that much about knapweed, but I would think that you'd want to keep it so that you don't have any seeds exposed, right? You want to keep everything covered up so that it does not get able to germinate. Every time we go down through with the tiller, we have now brought new weed seed bank to the surface to germinate and offered it to offerings of the perfect place to germinate. Every time we till it, we go back into asking for weeds. Okay, so 6 to 12 inches, is it going to disappear? Yeah. Nature's breaking it down constantly. So eventually you're going to have to keep adding more to it of the compost layer or the wood chip layer.
You're saying go 6 to 12 inches to start this.
Yep.
So you got to move all the dirt out of your, if you've got all these beds that you've kept for years.
You keep them.
Okay.
Just have wood chips going like this.
Oh, okay.
Yep. There'll be some examples here. So this is one where that they're just going to make a big, like a permaculture pile or a food forest pile area, and the other one is done in rows. But I'm just giving you guys seeds, right? So you can go home and look up yourselves on the web. There's lots of really good people to look for. This guy, James Pegroni, I'm friends with him on Facebook. He's got phenomenal stuff out there. He's changed his whole yard into a food forest, and it's now, I think, going in 7th year, but he was eating food like you wouldn't believe within a year 2 and 3. And now he's got a full canopy where his yard is a permaculture yard.
You don't have to water much either if you have
No.
all those chips.
No. The goal is to not water and let Mother Nature do it, right? And when she does, she's running water down through all of that wood. What happens when we pour water on leaves and wood? What comes out the other side? Humic acid. Perfect. And let Mother Nature put that humic layer down. Ideal. And wow, the soil that comes out from underneath of it is priceless. And the workload is one time and done, other than just to keep adding a little bit more to it. So you guys have natural resources. I have coffee grounds. I'm sure you guys, some of you live close to the coffee shops, make a relationship with them. Even the ones in those little huts, a lot of them are taking them to the dump because they don't have a relationship with the gardener. So make a relationship with your coffee shop. This is, I think it's 1.0. Oh, it's 2.0 nitrogen for your NPK from just your coffee grounds. So, and coffee grounds end up being 6.5 to 6.8. What do your plants want? Yeah, about that. If I could grow most anything, if I could get that, yeah, like glad. Ours is way too high, so we're usually trying to bring it down. You guys is the opposite, right? You're bring up. Okay, the very best resource you guys have got is right here in Whitefish. It's a dirt rich. Okay, so in there, got a lot, right? So they're, I don't know, everybody know about them? You know them? Okay, so they're gathering up the local food waste, and then they get wood chips from several wood chipping companies, and then they make it into Winrows, big operation of making compost. And she's also doing Elaine Ingham's soil food web trainings and stuff. So they currently right now are sending it off and getting tested, but they will be doing their own evaluations of it. They will still be testing, but it's so nice to go in and look under the microscope on your own, and you're like, yeah, this is exactly what I want. It's alive.
It doesn't smell, and it's black, and it's beautiful.
Yeah, isn't that nice?
It's really good.
Yeah. And some people say, well, it's expensive. Like, not if you make it into compost tea. It's just it just made it into priceless, that liquid gold, because now it's not expensive, because a gallon or a half gallon of it could be turned into 10 gallons of liquid that can then be added more water to it, diluted down to 5 to 10 times. So you've made a lot of compost and a lot of microbes with that tea brew. How do you know when the tea brew is done? It gets a frothy head on it, just like a beer, when it's done. And so like, I'm usually brewing for a fungal, so it's going to take more time. So at 24 hours, there might not be any head on that pile. There's going to be lines of circles running around in there. That's carbon. So any bubbles you see on the surface is carbon. But when it gets done, it's going to have a rolling head on it. And like, oh, perfect. I don't even have to go look under the microscope. It's going to be really good. And then mix it with water and then take it out. Yes?
Is there another way to aerate if you didn't have the bubbler? I mean, could you pour the buckets back and forth to get air into them?
Not for 72 hours.
Where do you get the, I mean, just at a greenhouse place? Or
The aerator, so I got mine on Amazon, but like Planet Natural in Bozeman, I don't know, you guys got other stores that I'm not familiar with that would be like a natural organic garden supply place. Do you got any place like that?
Yeah, I think there's one over off Meridian.
Okay, on Meridian.
And what's the dollar value? Just
About $100 in the bucket, the pump, everything you need. The bag. They come in kits. You just buy the whole kit. I was going to bring it, but I came on the train because I got concerned about the weather
Yeah.
and coming through the park in the winter. Yeah. I'm supposed to be in Culbertson on Monday morning, so I'm thinking I better take the train.
Yeah.
Any questions?
I'm guessing you don't have bears where you are, because when we put, it's really hard in whitefish to do any kind of food scraps because the bears either rip it up or roll the barrels around or just get into everything. And so the composting tea would be a lot better solution.
Right,
You don't have
exactly.
odor to attract them.
Right. And we don't have bears. We used to have bears. That was 150 years ago. We don't have any bears now. But we only have local dogs with no restraints. You know, so the local dogs can cause problems too. But yeah, that's a big asset, is to be able to just go buy the compost and then turn it into a compost tea. Yes.
What about anaerobic composting? Because I hate when we send our cow or sheep to market, to the butcher, put all that waste, and the butcher's 1 mile from our place, and wondering if that's black gold just up the road.
Yes, it is, because you got to have a big enough mass. What's that?
He just throws all the guts and hide it away.
Okay, so we're talking about food waste, animal waste coming off of the butchering process. So probably not the hide, but the other parts, right? They're all compostable, but we've got to get them up to that 160 degrees, and they've got to be in the center of the pile. So the guys that I've seen done it have piles almost the height of the ceiling, so they've loaded them with a tractor loader to be able to pile them high enough. I've seen them put whole cows in there, not processed. I mean, they died with a problem, right? And put them in the center of the pile and cover them up. 2 weeks later, the only things left is the pelvic bones and skull, the really big bones. And those over time will break down. I put a fish in what's the big fish with the great big paddlefish? I'm a fisherman. I was like, I only want the paddlefish. I don't want the fish. I didn't go catch it. I just went to the fish processing place where the fishermen are catching them. So they're just going to take them to the dump, and they just chop them up and put them back in the lake. I guess they do. I don't know what they do with them, but I said, oh, time out. I just want the whole body of the fish bones and tail and stuff and guts, and I'll take them with me. And they're like, ooh, okay, lady. Okay. So, but wow, they are fantastic in the middle of that pile. So the first time I did it, I put it in one day, went to bed the next day, get out there, middle of the day, 160 degrees, thought, okay, I'll turn it. I turned it. What did I find? The cartilage. Not on the paddlefish, this was a regular walleye, just the cartilage. The rest of it was unrecognizable. The next time I turned it, nothing. It took 3 days for the paddlefish cartilage to leave the pile. I'm like, nature can do her own thing. We just give her the resources and let her go. Yes?
So I might be asking a silly question, but so once you get it to 160 degrees and you put it on your garden.
No, you don't put it, you're turning the pile to invert it. So you're going to keep inverting it until the pile goes back to ambient temperature. Whatever the temperature is outside, the pile will drop down to.
Okay.
Then it's going to cure. You've got to cure it.
Okay.
So you're going to let some time go by before you're going to go put it on the garden.
Okay. So obviously let it settle and then put it on your garden.
Right.
And so when you compost, do you only do it like a few times in the year or in the summertime, or is it just one time and then you're...
I make as many batches as my travel schedule will allow me to do. So one year I made 7. In other years I make 3. Just depends.
And then you just keep adding it to your garden every year?
I'm using it as compost tea and to inoculate more compost. But then you can use it just right on your garden too. Right. How do we know when it's went back to a cured state? So you take a little sample of it, like that baggie, and put it in a planting tray and put some tomato seeds on there, and they're going to tell you yes or no. If they sprout, all good to go. If they don't, then it's not quite ready yet. How do we know if we get supply in like straw? Straw is like one of the most deadly things that we can get a hold of. We better really know our farmer and know exactly what he's doing before we get straw. And sometimes even horse waste, because those residues are coming all the way through the horse waste into the horse manure. So we really need to know those producers or be the producer yourself as to what's going on. But so how do we judge that? So we do the same thing. We could chop up the straw and put it with some regular soil and then put some tomato seeds in there. And if they grow, great. If they're like, we're out of this game, don't even bring this product onto your property. Don't go there. Tell them no thank you, even if it's a gift, because you don't want it. I know gardeners that have put on straw 7 years ago and still can't grow potatoes. Can't grow anything. They essentially sterilized their land. So you just can't run the risk. Yeah.
Chickens, do they, with the pine shavings and all that, is that wood or is that nitrogen or both? Or,
Oh, the bedding?
Yeah.
Yep.
Bedding.
So the bedding's going to be more nitrogen, even though it's got carbon mixed in it. Right? And back to Eden, some of the real true back to Eden processes using the chicken manure in the mulching part. Yep. Any other questions? They're going to make us get out of the room. We're getting low on time.
What's your ratio of water to compost tea? Do you have one?
So I usually go 5 to 1. So 5 parts water to 1 part tea. Right? So that 5 gallons now became 25 gallons of liquid. Some people want to know how often to put it on, as often as you can make it. How often do you have to put it on? 1 time is amazing. So I had a science fair project where they put on the compost tea on the seeds before they germinated and planted them. And then their control was no compost on the seed. And the seed roots on the plants with the compost were anywhere from 12 to 20 inches longer than the ones without, with one dose of compost tea.
Safe to put on when you're trying to grow seeds indoors.
Mm-hmm. Yep, and your germination process is going to be way faster. Our test trials showed it 3 days faster by putting compost tea on the seeds and then planting them than to do the seed and water and no compost tea. Any other questions?
So essentially you're just giving each seed a tiny bit of compost.
You're giving each seed a tiny bit of the soil food web, and it adheres to the plant, the seed coat, the radicle. That radicle to take the soil life all the way to the bottom of the rhizosphere with it. And so when we pulled that experiment out and we took the soil out at the bottom of the roots, the soil life's there. It's not in any other part, but it's there where you treated it. It went right down with the radicle. The soil food web did with it, the life. Yes?
I have access to a lot of pine bark. Now, does that change the pH much, or do I have to...
I have a resource on here that you'd want to look at, and they'll explain how it doesn't.
Okay.
So it's a good news.
And then secondly, when you put that much wood chips on, will you have to add a little extra nitrogen due to the rotting process or not?
No, where the problem starts with nitrogen in the wood chips is when we commingle it with our soil. Then we're going to have a nitrogen tie-up. But this is wood chips on top of the soil, and it doesn't cause a nitrogen tie-up. Okay, I think our time is up. They should be coming through the door. But if here's my contact, and it will be on the video. There's some business cards for anybody that's off-grid and can't use the internet. Okay, and you'd want to have the recipe too. But,